Today, it's a slightly different format. I will be talking about perennial vegetables for about 45, 50 minutes. And then, rather than being outside showing you my attempts at perennial vegetables, I will be interviewing a friend of mine, orchardist Martin Hayes, who lives in Cheltenham. He's great. He's very, very knowledgeable about all things to do with fruit trees. He is due here, not here in the studio. We're doing a Zoom chat. So we're going to do Zoom, and then we're going to be doing it with Zoom chat will be live broadcast on Twitch. So this is so many things to go wrong. You can't believe it. So obviously everything will go perfectly smoothly. So hello to everybody. Let's get cracking with perennial vegetables. My name is Jake Rayson. I am a forest gardener and a forest garden designer. I live in West Wales. So yes, let's move on to perennial vegetables because we're kind of rapidly running out of time. I've gonna have first thing really is to say thank you to Gillian and Erin. Had an email from Gillian. Erin is setting up her she's 13 years old and she's starting a forest garden. So I asked people for suggestions about the topics, and she suggested perennial vegetables. So yeah, thank you very much for the suggestion. I had some notes kicking around already, so this has all kind of been put together. So thank you very much for the suggestion, and good luck with the forest garden. So I hope this is useful. Now I do want to say, for today's workshop, first of all, before we go any further, I am not an expert at perennial vegetables. I have a few that I'm growing, but are not on any kind of massive scale. With a forest garden, what you will find is that there are so many different aspects to it. It's a bit like I'm a Jake of all trades, as I like to joke badly. There's lots of different things that you can find out about and know a little bit about, but not it's it's the in-depth knowledge sometimes that you're lacking. It takes time to build it up. So this is just my kind of experience, my aspect on it, starting out with perennial vegetables. I am not an expert at this. There are a couple of people. I will come to them later on in the talk in the workshop, who I totally recommend. Go and find out more information from them. I really, really do recommend that you kind of search out for more information. This is just kind of my personal take on it. My top 10 perennial vegetables, but there's loads of stuff out there. So we'll come on to that. So a little kind of disclaimer. And because this workshop, I'm not sure. This is a general workshop, so every week I will be going through a forest garden definition. So today, forest garden definition, the importance of accessibility, access to various parts of your garden, and the third part is protecting your crops, kind of protection. And then finally, it'll be me running through a top 10 list of perennial vegetables. Okay, so let's move on. So, as previous viewers will be aware, this is the way I like to describe a forest garden is as a wildlife orchard. Pretty much everybody, can imagine what an orchard is like. A garden, a set of fruit trees, with the space with grass underneath. And then you harvest apples and pears and plums and cherries and the like. So just imagine an orchard which has been grown specifically for wildlife as well. So there's different areas there. There's windbreaks, there's shelter, there's habitat. It's a bit kind of more untidy. So imagine that. So there's a surrounding living material, a hedge, and it's underplanted. Not just with grass, but it's underplanted with edible shrubs. So rather than grass, you have edible shrubs. So, for example, red currants, black currants, gooseberries, the normal kind of suspects, and other shrubs as well, barberries and the like, and perennial vegetables. And these are kind of generally herbaceous perennials. So they're ones that die down in winter. And rather than having grass as the ground cover, you have a different types of ground cover. So strawberries or some sort of creeping raspberries, and that gives people a kind of good idea of what it looks like, and the sense of being able to visualize it. The kind of three characteristics are: it's productive, so you're generally growing edible crops, but you can also be growing crops like willow, for example, in the image here, for poles or for weaving. You can grow herbs, dye plants, all manner of different things that you actually use. It's sustainable, which is absolutely key. It's a closed, what do they call it? It's a closed system. So it's a self-supporting system. It's open up to the kind of broad landscape, but it supports itself in terms of nutrients, in terms of wildlife predators for pests. You're not bringing anything in. Humans aren't bringing anything in onto the site, so it looks after itself. It's a low impact, it's low carbon, but it's productive. One of the kind of key things about it is that it's working with nature, so you're constantly encouraging biodiversity. So as part of this, I do tend to emphasize that you use native plants where possible, because native plants co-evolve with native wildlife. So they're providing a home and they're providing foodstuffs for all the different stages, not just pollinators, but also for the larval stages of insects. And without insects, you don't have any other life at all. So native plants, where possible, you can fit them into a forest garden quite easily, which means that a kind of side effect of this is low maintenance. There's minimal weeding. You do have to weed, but it really is minimal. There's no watering, no digging, no fertilizers, or no compost. Yeah. Now this relates to the forest garden, so kind of when I emphasize this, I still do grow annual vegetables, so I am still making compost, large quantities of compost, and I am still kind of hoeing and weeding and all the rest of it. But with a forest garden, this is why I want to transition to using perennial vegetables more. There's far less of that. So in the photograph that you can see, this is comfrey, which it's a chop and drop mulch. Comfrey is a very good source of potassium for fruiting trees, and you lay it as a mulch once or twice a year around the base of a tree, and that is your fertilizing. So and I've made up 5 guidelines as well for this protection. The 5 guidelines, things to bear in mind throughout the process. And forest gardening really it's a practice. It's something that you do, and it's something that you continue to do. Okay, so I've just seen a note in the chat. So forest gardening is a practice. It's something that you continue to do. So just bear these things in mind throughout the process. It's not just like a one-off. Always bear these in mind when you're working on the different parts of the garden, and it's never finished either. So NB says this is the ranking Miss P says don't eat the actual shrubs. Generally you eat generally you eat the fruit, but there are some kind of shrubs that you can eat. I mean, it depends what you mean by eating the shrubs. You can eat saltbush, for example. You eat the leaves off the saltbush. You can have a coppiced small leaf lime or coppiced white mulberry, and then you can eat the leaves on these trees. Most of the time you're eating the berries, you're eating the fruit, but sometimes you can actually eat the leaves off those shrubs as well. So just clear that up. So back to protection. Windbreaks first and foremost. They're really, really important. One of the first things you do when you're setting up a forest garden, set up your windbreaks, because your plants, this goes for any garden, your plants will prosper if you provide protection for them. Ideally, you want to have a windbreak on all sides, taller on the north side, shorter on the south and the west, midway on the east side. Before you get to the fully grown windbreaks, you can use nurse trees, which are small shrubs that you grow a couple of meters in front of specific trees to give them a bit of extra shelter. The photograph is of a broom, whose scientific name I can't remember. Scotch broom. Nope, can't remember it at all. And Scotch broom is a good. It's fast growing. It needs full sun, nitrogen fixing, and it provides shelter for specific fruit trees. And the other thing you can do is to grow, is to build a dead hedge. Now there's a chap. Oh, I must put this in as well. Whilst I'm here, I'll put this in the chat. There's a chap called John Little, and his Grass Roof Company, and he very interesting. He's a proper kind of garden designer, and he's created a dead hedge, which is like Andy Goldsworthy's, the artist. It's beautiful. It's just a beautifully made, really tidy kind of snaking dead hedge. It's amazing. So you can do an awful lot with it. Spacing is the critical thing when you're planting your trees. You need to know the size of your trees, the final size of them, the diameter and the height, and you want to have a quarter to half of the average canopy diameter. So layers is the next thing. You use all the available space in a forest garden. So you have the ground cover, the shrubs, the small trees, the canopy layer. You've got climbers. So you're using all available space across the year. Ground cover is an easy win. So grow ground cover for the conditions that you have in your garden. Around here, ground ivy works really well, generally not in the sunniest spots, but in the kind of slightly shadier, slightly damper spots. It's a native. It's fantastic ground cover. I've got lots of it, but it's easy. This is what you want. You want it to be as easy as possible, and that means no weeding. So you permanently cover the ground. There's no weeding to do. And nutrients. You're growing plants that provide nutrients for the garden. So you have to have you're providing potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus is actually in the soil. So potassium, you're growing comfrey. Nitrogen, you're growing nitrogen fixing plants like any member of the alder family, the trees. So Italian alder is a good. It's quite a bit. It's a big tree, but it's a very good tree for nitrogen fixing. Lots of nitrogen fixing shrubs, autumn olive, sea buckthorn, members of the pea family, broom, Siberian pea tree. So there's quite a lot of choice out there for growing your own nutrients in that garden. So why perennial vegetables? Let's move on to the veg. Why perennial vegetables? Well, ultimately, it's easier, and kind of it's easier and it's less impact, and you're using less materials. It's actually hard. It's like a lot of things about a forest garden. It is quite hard to set up. It does take time, and there's a lot of work involved in setting it up. But once it's set up, it's much easier to maintain. And the whole emphasis, I was kind of thinking about this last night. It's not a detailed way of gardening. There isn't like it's not pristine and fine detail. It's like it's broad brush strokes. So you say that area is a ground cover, and it is fruiting bushes, and it's a couple of trees. It's really kind of broad. Whereas with annual vegetables, it's very much about everything's very, very tightly controlled, because it has to be, because it's like it's high maintenance. This is a photograph from a market garden up the road called Gleeblands, and I'd worked there last summer. And my job was to, I did the weeding and watering mostly, and planting. I planted a couple of thousand leeks, and I watered the lettuce and all the celery and all the different plants. And it is so much work. It really is. And you can understand, on a commercial scale, this is what you have to do. If you want to get the productivity, if you want to get the turnover, if you're a market garden, then totally, this is how you do it. You make it as easy as possible. You automate as much as possible. But we're kind of not talking about that with forest gardens. Forest gardens are for individuals. It's on an individual scale, and it's a different thing. It's not, we're not doing it commercially. So it's not like agroforestry, where it's a commercial system for growing vegetables. It's on a much smaller scale. So it's not the same thing. So the growing vegetables doesn't have to scale at home. Yeah. Annuals are constant work. It's you're constantly sowing plants, you're pricking them out, you're planting them out, you're weeding, you're mulching, you're watering. It really is an awful lot of work. One of my a hero of mine is Alison Tyndale at Backyard Larder. I'll come on to it in a minute. She's written a couple of articles about vegetables for the venerable, and her parents are elderly, and she said perennial vegetables are so much lower maintenance that they're much easier to grow for people who either don't have the time or the energy or the mobility to grow veg. So yeah, that's why perennial vegetables, I really think, are the way to go. There's a big barrier to it, which is knowledge about perennial vegetables and how do you eat them. There's a lot of stuff out there. I don't know how to eat it. There's a snowbell tree, Halesia carolina, which is growing at the moment. I've eaten one snowbell tree fruit. How do you cook with it? How do you preserve it? There's all this information, and there's all the cultural side of it as well. So I think transitioning to perennial vegetables is the way to go, but it is a bit of a challenge, and I kind of like to get on top of it and spread the knowledge a bit. So first off, then, with this is with any gardening, but specifically with perennial vegetables, it's the question of accessibility. That you want to have, the stuff that you grow, the stuff that you use every day in the kitchen, is the stuff that you want to have nearest to the house. So herbs, for example, herbs and kind of spinachy type plants. You want the herbs really close to the house because you use them every day. Spinachy type plants a bit further away, but it's just kind of that idea of it being accessible, that you can pop out and you can go and get it. And part of that is paths. Now, an awful lot of this stuff is not for growing plants; it's for the accessibility of people to harvest the plants. So paths are absolutely essential. I made the mistake of I put the beds in when we came here for some annual beds, and I made them 1.5 meters wide, thinking yes, lots of big space, big beds, and actually they're less productive because I can't reach all the way. I can't reach across to the middle, so I have to stand on it, and it's a pain. It takes longer. So design it so that it's accessible, so that the paths are, from the path you can reach where the vegetables are. 1.2 meters is a kind of okay width for the width of a bed, possibly smaller even. It's not for the plants, this is for the people. Signage is another really important aspect as well. I've asked the members of my family to go out and pick something, and they say, what is a Welsh onion? Where is the Welsh onion? I go, oh, it's at the back. It's around the back of the corner, the red corners, and they don't know where it is. So I've now made signs that I put up next to different vegetables, and it actually really helps. It makes a big difference. It kind of it focuses the mind. It's not for the plant's benefit, it's for your benefit, so you know where things are. Close to the kitchen, and access to knowledge as well. Accessibility to knowledge is a critical part of this. I'm sure I've got this later on, but I'll just mention it quickly now. There's Plants for a Future is a website that I totally recommend as a reference for as a massive great big database of edible plants and useful plants. So Plants for a Future is the place to go for information. Future pfaf.org. And the other one is Edimentals. There's a chap called Stephen Barstow, who's great, who's written a book about around the world in oh crikey, Around the World in 80 Plants, I think. And he's got a website called Elementals by Stephen Buster. There's a Facebook group as well. So honestly, check those out. Elementals.com, and a Facebook group too. So access to knowledge really is important. The Facebook group for Elementals is good because it gets you looking at a whole range of different stuff that people are chatting about, plants I've never even heard of, let alone tasted. And there's an awful lot there's great depth of knowledge there as well. So there's a discussion about different types of hostas and which are the most edible hostas and which taste the best and which is the most productive. And it's great. It's really, really good. It's a kind of one of my go-to places for perennial vegetable information. So Facebook group as well. I'll put that in the notes. So yeah, it's and I find this is really, really interesting. It's about the paths. It's the people paths that lead to the attention. Yeah, it's if you can get somewhere and there's a path there, then you will go there and then you will notice things. Like the other day, I did a video of the forest garden. I did a little kind of mini tour one evening last week. One evening, a few days ago. And what's so nice about doing that is that I actually looked around at the different plants and I saw that there was, I can't remember what it was, there was a tree that needed some water, and okay, I must do that. Oh, I need to put a tree guard on, and then you register that and you do it. It's only small little jobs, but it's just every day. If you have a decent set of paths and decent access, then the areas won't get forgotten and they will be maintained in a kind of just keeping things ticking along sort of way. And here are the signs that that was discussing, my homemade signs, and close to the kitchen. Oh yeah, so this is a small forest garden I designed for somebody. Just showing you where the different vegetables are and things, but keep it close to the kitchen. Oh, here we go. So here's all the links on here. Access to knowledge, the backyard larder. Obviously, in the time of coronavirus lockdown, there's a lot of she's been selling out in a shop, but if you sign up for her newsletter, you'll get notification of when the perennial vegetables are coming back into stock. And Stephen Barstow at Elementals and Mandy Barber at Incredible Vegetables. I haven't had much to do with Mandy Barber. I just heard good things about her and the website, so giving her a mention here. And there is a book by Martin Crawford. Oh, crikey, where's my book gone? How to Create a Forest Garden. Hold on a second. Oh, my goodness me, the book was not next to my desk. This book here, How to Creating a Forest Garden, Working with Nature to Grow Edible Crops, is the book I recommend for everybody who's growing a forest garden. He has got a book called How to Grow Perennial Vegetables, but I would say don't bother with that. Get this book because it's got the perennial vegetable information in there. But if you just want one book about perennial vegetables, I'd go for the Martin Crawford one. There are lots of other books out there as well which I don't know about, so please have a look around. These are just the ones I've come across because there doesn't seem to be enough time in the day to do everything. And Plants for a Future, fantastic, brilliant website. Totally recommend it. I use it incessantly. And then another one as well, which I do use. Oh, I'll try and bring it up here, which is funnily enough might not be so much for perennial, maybe not so much for vegetables, but for but for plants in general, for the forest garden, is actually way more useful than you would give it credit for. Is the RHS website. It is a gold mine. Obviously its focus isn't on kind of useful, productive plants, but it's really good for native plants and it's really good for kind of ornamental stuff as well. There's a lot of crossover. I'll just give you a link to the RHS plant finder, RHS online database. There we go. So that's really good. And there's a native filter at the bottom, on the left hand side at the bottom, so if you're looking for native plants, it helps you find them as well. So that's the accessibility aspect of it. Oh, attention, yeah. Always, yeah. Paths and signage, always need to weed. Look at what grows there naturally, and do bear in mind that as a forest garden develops, it will become shadier and shadier. So you need to kind of think about longer term the shade that's going to be cast by trees that you've planted a few years down the line. The nice thing about kind of smaller shrubs and herbaceous perennials is that they're much easier to move, and you can move things around easier. But just, do bear it in mind and look around what grows there anyway. In the lee of a hedge, I was saying before, we've got some ground ivy, Glaucoma heteracea, which grows really well, and it's slightly shadier, it's a slightly damper places, it really likes it, not full sun. So similar situations, that's where I plant it out. For kind of full sun, I'll use a different ground cover plant. Hello Angie on the chat. Pennard plants in Somerset have perennial plants and heirloom seeds. That's great. So that's Pennard plants in Somerset. Thank you for that, Angie. Where am I? Here we go. And protection. So one of the things that where have we gone? Yep. One of the things that are really about vegetable gardening generally, this came up in the discussion last night for gardeners in the veganic gardeners question time, is that the reason why you weed around vegetables is not because you don't like weeds, it's because you don't like slugs. Yep, they are a habitat for slugs. Now, if you have established perennial vegetables, like you've got a 6-foot tree kale. I saw a photograph of one on the internet the other day. I think it was a Portuguese kale, and no joke, it must have been getting on for over 2.5 meters. The chap was on a step ladder, trying to prune his Portuguese kale. But you've got that, slugs won't touch it. It's too big. Whereas if you have annual vegetables, particularly at the seedling stage, that's when they're the most vulnerable, and that's why you weed and hoe and clear the weeds away. This is a photograph. I had some calendula officinalis marigold growing. I let it grow in the annual raised bed, and it provided a home for. It looked lovely, but it provided a home for slugs, and it wiped out. I can't remember what I was growing there. I think it might have been beans or something, annual beans. So yeah, do bear in mind that this is why we're weeding. We're weeding not because we don't like weeds, but because we don't like slugs, and not because we don't like slugs. It's because we don't like slugs eating our vegetables. They can have some, but not all of them. So yeah, slugs. You're protecting from slugs. Also from wind, as I mentioned before, and our friend the pigeons, wood pigeons, bless them. Again, if you've got, when I was working on the market garden, they had a massive expanse of cabbages, like row after row, and one of the jobs it was a bit of a more remote site. One of the jobs is to get netting and drag massive great netting over like 4 rows of kale or something, because the wood pigeons know where the kale is. They'll come in, they'll get it. Whereas if you've got perennial vegetables and you've got them scattered throughout your garden, I mean, I've got, at the moment, for example, I've got 3 Asturian tree cabbage in the forest garden and a couple of Portuguese kale, but they're all over the place. I mean, it is a bit of it can be hard to find out where they are sometimes. But I've had no wood pigeon. We've got loads of wood pigeons here. I really haven't noticed any wood pigeon damage. A bit of cabbage white damage, but nothing much. So again, if it's kind of more mixed in, it's going to be less of a problem. The more intensive it is, then the more the kind of the pests, so-called, the more they're going to be on top of it. So yeah, possibly you want to protect pit cabbages with netting, but really we want to be in a situation where we're moving past that. So my top tip is to when you're starting out with perennial vegetables is to treat them as though they are annual vegetables, which means keeping them weeded, keeping them clear from slug habitat, possibly kind of protecting them. But once they're big enough, they will be big enough to look after themselves. The example I've got here is, what's it called? It's called Turkish Rocket, Buneus orientalis. And there's about half a dozen plants here, I think. And I put them into, they were getting eaten to pieces in the perennial, I put them in a perennial bed. They were getting eaten to pieces. They didn't have a chance. They kept getting eaten by slugs. I put them into an annual bed, and then I kept it weeded around the edges. They shot up, and now they're big enough and they've got a strong enough root structure. I will plant them out into the perennial veg area later on. So I've kind of done this with a few different plants. So I'd kind of get them big enough, grow them so they're big enough to be planted out in the perennial veg area and to look after themselves. If you are going to grow, if you are growing annual vegetables, which I think most people will be, because we're growing potatoes and beans and Bolotti beans and French beans and courgettes and peppers and tomatoes. And it's going, so we are still growing annual vegetables. You will need to have compost. It takes a while for the tree crops, like the berries and the nut crops from hazel and sweet chestnut, to really come on stream. It takes a few years for that to come on stream, and that'll change, and our balance of our diet will change. But for now, we really are like annual vegetables full on. This is our hot composting technique. The sides, then it depends on the space that you have. The critical thing is to keep the compost chopped up, mixed up, so you turn it twice a week, and you keep it covered, so you keep the moisture in and you keep the temperature in. You don't have to have sides on the heaps, but it depends how much space you've got. If you've got limited space, like this, where the beds are here, there is limited space, so it's good to have pallets as the sides just to keep everything in. But the key thing is to have a kind of waterproof covering to keep the moisture in. If it gets too dry, water it or open it up to the rain. But keep it chopped up small, mixture of green and brown, and turn it once or twice a week. And then you'll get kind of good quality compost that you can put. And we kind of follow the no dig method of gardening. Charles Dowding, who's the UK advert, Ruth Stout was talking about it, crikey, 70 years ago, possibly 1950s. But yeah, no dig. We use compost rather than straw or hay. The reason being is not the quality of the soil, it's that if you're using a straw mulch and you're in a wet area of the UK, then you will get slugs, and they will eat your plants. So use a compost mulch, which is why I'm now making much more compost. In the photograph here, again, another example of growing plants on. This is Buckshorn plantain. I've got these seeds from the Real Seed Company in just up the road, Newport in Pembrokeshire. They're online, realseeds.co.uk, I think it is. But another example of growing perennial vegetables in an annual bed, and then I'm planting these out later on, but I've got the perennial veg bed sorted out. Just a quick note about the mulch. In a forest garden now, I would not use plastic at all. Like woven plastic sheet mulch, I am moving away from using. I've got it here because this is what I thought would be a good path in between the beds. If you can, use wood chip, particularly if you're on a flat level ground. Use wood chip paths, far less damaging, and you don't have to have raised beds either. I made raised beds because I thought that's what you needed. You don't need to have raised beds, really. It's much more about marking the area out. Okay, so on to the top 10 perennial vegetables. I'll whiz through these because I'm going to have to go and have a break quickly. Oh, yes, I've got things there. Cool. So my top 10 perennial vegetables are Caucasian spinach, and I'll go through these. Caucasian spinach, daylilies, Welsh onion, garden sorrel, good King Henry. Oh, it's just me reading a list. It's actually really dull. You can see the list there. You'll be able to read up on this later on. The link will always be. I'll put the link in the chat so people can see it. The link will always pretty much be here. forestgarden.wales. Bung. Yep. So that go to the link and you can see them yourself. I'll just talk about them with a nice pretty picture. Caucasian spinach is a great plant. Any plant that has its own Facebook group must be pretty special. It can grow in the shade. It likes kind of moist soil, grows in the shade. Herbaceous perennial. It's a climber, grows very rapidly, shoots early. And it grows up to 3 meters, and you can have it in the shade. So it's a good, really good spot for a kind of full shade position. And it's a kind of, use it like a spinach plant. You can use it in salads. I've got a plant, but it's just how things have worked out. I still haven't planted it out where I want to have it. I've got a shady spot of the forest garden, a shady damp spot, which is where it's going. But I still haven't quite made it there yet. So I actually haven't eaten any. I just got to keep it alive long enough for it to go out there. But totally worth it. Lots of people rave about it. Alison at Backyard Larder has got some. Well, did have some in stock yesterday. Daylilies, Hemericalis. It's brilliant. They're great. You can eat the flower buds, and as your name suggests, they flower their flowers only last one day. You eat the flower buds. I think you can eat the flowers as well. Again, I haven't really grown them. I think we've got a couple. I haven't really grown them as a crop yet. I haven't really kind of got into the full swing of it. I think full sun. All the links here will go off to Plants for a Future, so you can find out more information about them. But they're easy to grow. They're perennial vegetables. You can use them. You can cook with them. You can put them in salads. They're fab, and they're kind of that crossover between the ornamental and the edible as well. They're proper edimental crossover plant, and there's a huge range of different colours, and some have been selected for flavour as well rather than just the colours. But they're really kind of interesting kind of group of plants to use. Oops, Welsh onion. Which is not from Wales. I think it's I can't remember. It's not from Wales. It's not actually nothing to do with Wales. The name's been mangled along the way. But these are great. They're quite ornamental as well. My partner would like some of these in the. There's an ornamental border she wants to put some in, and you can use them as like chives, or you can actually use them like spring onions as well. They do die back in winter. But you can get hold of an everlasting onion that lasts through the winter, fresh leaves all winter as well. So kind of really nice plant actually, and they're clumping, and you can divide them and then you can plant them on. Really good. Garden sorrel, kind of lemony flavour, kind of easy to get hold of. You can get a non-flowering cultivars from somewhere. Not terribly sure where it is. Can't remember where you get them from. But they're really good. You can cook with them. You can put them in salad. So very exciting, easy to grow plant as well. I'm actually putting that in I'm putting all of these into a forest garden design I'm doing for a client at the moment, a local client, which is great. They want a perennial vegetable area, so I'm kind of incorporating these in. Good King Henry dies right back in the winter, but just kind of, if you get it established, get a plant, get it in, it's great. Needs full sun. Use it as a spinach plant, a spinach replacement. Smaller leaves, so it can be a bit more fiddly to harvest, but they just get on with it. They're really kind of tough and resilient. And you can also eat the flower shoots, and you can steam them like everything's like asparagus, but you can steam them like asparagus. And the seeds are edible as well. Member of the sorghum family, so related to fat hen, which is an annual, which it looks quite similar to, but really kind of stalwart perennial vegetable. Perennial kale, Dorberton's kale. It's one I was growing. I've lost Dorberton's kale. I kept my eye off the ball. It's gone. So I need to get some more. They can go pretty tall. To about 2 meters. People kind of saying, I've heard different things. I've got some Portuguese kale that I'm actually about to eat for this evening's meal. People saying it's quite tough, whereas the Dorberton's kale is a much better flavour. So again, I know that Incredible Vegetables and Backyard Larder should have them in stock, if not now then soon. And Taunton Dean's another variety as well, and they're really kind of low maintenance. They're really easy to grow. So totally recommend getting a perennial kale in. And then Perennial Leek. Now Babington's leek, I'm a bit all over the place with my alliums. There's so many to choose from, and I've gone and not labelled them properly. So I have a patch which is Babington's leek, which is kind of smaller and garlicky, but there's a more leaky cultivar of a wild leek, which is you can get from Backyard Larder. I haven't got them yet. I will get them for my new perennial veg area, but you don't harvest all of them. You just take the ones and then you leave some. They grow on, and then you just keep on planting them out, separating them, keep it ticking over. And Siberian Purslane, which is great. It's a lovely, beautiful little plant, kind of earthy, minerally flavoured leaves. Use them in salad, and you can cook with them as well. I've got a couple dotted around. Haven't really planted them en masse, so I'm just kind of keeping them alive, and then I'll plant them out in the new perennial vegetable area when it gets established. I'm just sheet mulching it at the moment, and once that's done, then I'll bring in I'll have different areas for different perennial vegetables with paths to them, and I'll be using Siberian Purslane as a ground cover as well. And Turkish Rocket, which is, once it gets growing, it does grow. It's really good. Again, I'm going to start harvesting this as well. This has all come up again this year. And finally, wild garlic, Ramsons, absolutely beautiful. Rampant will take over a spot, so they come up in the early spring, and they're flowering, just end of flowering now, I think. Really good combination. Oh yeah, good combination with ground ivy or alefoot. So totally worth it. And let me see. Yep. So do make sure that you don't want them. They won't go where you don't want them to go. But a really good ground cover, particularly in combination with ground ivy or alefoot as it's known. And another one that I really wanted to kind of mention is Jerusalem artichoke. There are lots of cultivars of it. People get the wind from them from eating them because they've got a chemical called inulin in them, which gives a lot of people wind, and I had the same problem with them. I tried roasting them and deep frying them and trying to break it down, but it didn't work. What I did find has worked is making them into a sauerkraut, and it's delicious. It's absolutely lovely. So this year, for the first time in years, I am actually growing them on purpose. You can have them in the forest garden as a temporary windbreak. They're herbaceous; they die right back in winter. But you can have them grow them as a temporary windbreak. But I am growing them for the tubers, because I will be making lots and lots of sauerkraut. I'll store them in a potato bag and then make a batch of sauerkraut of it wouldn't be called sauerkraut, it would be called sour choke. So Jerusalem artichoke, totally recommend it. Okay, right then. So takeaways for this is accessibility, attention, and protection. Treat annuals treat perennials as if they're annual until they get established, and then plants for a future website. Totally recommend it. So those are the three takeaways, things to take away with you. So welcome, Martin Hayes, orchardist extraordinaire, based in Cheltenham. How are you?
Very well, thank you. In my shed, in my back garden.
In your shed. Some nice props you have there in the background.
Yes.
Are they working axes? Is that a working axe?
It used to be, it's not anymore. Used to chop wood with it. Rather buy it in nowadays. Too old.
Right then, let's get going with the questions.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of continuation. I've been talking about perennial vegetables for the past hour. So this is the first time I've had a guest on. So I really hope that that the sound is good enough. I'll try and get the questions up here. So can you please just to let people know how did you get started out working in the world of orchards? How did you get started out with fruit trees?
With strawberries, really. When I was 16, I left home and went strawberry picking. Liked it a lot. Then went to pick apples and plums and got to learn of networks of people that did that sort of thing. Itinerant workers travelling around. At first, in the early days, I didn't drive, so it was all buses, trains, and hitchhiking. And picking fruit and potatoes and doing the apples and plums. And then one day, the farmer, I was about 20, I suppose, the farmer on the plum orchard asked me if I wanted to stay on and learn how to prune, apples. And that was the start of it, really. And then I worked for him off and on, and I still travelled all over the place doing stuff. But then I always came back to, I came to Wales to do the potatoes, which is actually my favourite, worst job in the world, but actually my favourite place to be. And I never looked back, really. I still travelled. And then I managed to get a driving licence, and I bought a van, a lorry, and a caravan. And that was my life then. Itinerant fruit, stroke vegetable picker, stroke hay baler, flour, all sorts of stuff.
So what do you do now then? What's most of your work?
Orchard work.
Say again?
All traditional, mainly traditional. I don't do so much commercial stuff anymore, although I do go in and do consultations for people. Small fry really. The big farms now are all, you probably know, they're all on small rootstocks, heavily intensified growing, and the pruning now is all done by machine.
Right.
12-year turnaround then, plants pulled up, thrown away, and replanted. So it's almost like a crop that's just keep rotating. They keep taking it out, replanting, and it's a totally different scene now in the commercial growing thing. I keep in touch with it because a lot of the innovation comes from there, of course.
Yeah. Oh, blimey. So very, very different setup, a kind of industrialisation of fruit trees.
I mean, it's very sad to see when they pull them up because there's just piles of trees just being burnt. And they literally are brutal. They just pull them up and chuck them on that big fire. And it's a real shame because if there was a community of people that could get together when they were going to do that, there's some lovely trees there that could suffice people for many, many, many years. But you need a massive logistical thing to be able to sort that out, actually.
Yeah. So for people then who who are new to pruning fruit trees, who want to kind of grow fruit trees, do you have to prune fruit trees? What's the kind of rationale behind it?
Yeah, well, generally, if you plant a new orchard, you need to prune from really year 2 or 3. I recommend. I never recommend pruning year 1 because they've been dug up from the nursery. They've already had their trauma for 1 year.
Yeah.
Jury's out. There's different people have different ideas. Some people say yes, prune straight away. Really, the only thing I would prune on year 1 would be if the trees were too tall, and in that case they could get blown over by the wind.
Yeah.
But generally, I would start pruning year 2, possibly if it was a good ground and the trees grew well. I mean, there's 3 stages early doors. Is when you plant your tree, the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. Doesn't mean nothing's happening. It means everything's happening underground.
Yeah.
All the roots are getting established. And yes, formative pruning you need to do because you need to know what kind of tree you want at the end of it. And if you don't start year 3, it could get away from you, and then you're going to have difficulty deciding whether you're going to have a central leader, like Christmas tree shape that people call it, or the goblet shape.
What happens if you don't prune a fruit tree? I mean, what happens? What does it do?
Well, generally, unfortunately, fruit trees, and I'm looking at my cherry tree outside now, which is a sort of semi-dwarf, and it's got too big. Not only because I inherited it, I moved in and it was already like that. I hasten to add. They don't know when to stop growing. They just grow and grow and grow, and they lose branches. They can be undermined if big branches, if big limbs go. And so pruning, I guess it's really like, it's like genetic modification. We've put these trees onto rootstocks. We've worked out rootstocks and ways of growing them. And if you're on a small rootstock and you leave the tree to get too big, it'll fall over. For sure. And it's not strong enough. There's not enough roots.
It's because it's been bred. That's the main issue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been man-made, and that's why there's some wildlife people that don't like orchards so much, because they're actually man-made rather than natural. I mean, it's changed in recent years where people see the benefits of old traditional orchards and the way they kind of the habitat they've got then. But for a long time, they were poo-pooed orchards as man-made and not really worth the bother. But things have changed then.
I think it's an interesting thing from the forest garden point of view. It's that whole idea of intervention, and that people think a forest garden is just a wild garden, but actually there's a great deal of intervention, but it's minimal intervention is what you're after.
Absolutely.
And I think people don't realise with fruit trees, I certainly didn't when I started, was that it is something you have to maintain. You keep on maintaining it. It's not something you don't just plant it and leave it. So there's quite a lot of similarities between them. And when I talk about forest gardens, I actually often describe them as a wildlife orchard. And
I mean, there's two aspects to it. One is to get the best out of the garden for yourself, the best fruit, the best. If that's what you're in, that's what you want, is the nicest fruit. Not fruit that's just going to be rotten on the tree. Nicely ripened then in the sun because it's got a lot of sunlight. But also the other aspect is for the tree health. It's a form of neglect if you leave your tree to just do its own thing. A fruit tree I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's not capable of doing its own thing. Whether you like it or not, it's been interfered with. Whether people agree with that or they don't agree with it, those are the facts. And if you leave your tree just to do its own thing, it is a form of neglect. And I have told people when I go to pick fruit, I say you need your tree pruned, and they say no, I like it like this because it does this, it shades this, it's da-da-da. And I'm saying, but it is a form of neglect.
Yeah.
The tree is not capable of surviving in the state that it is.
So do you recommend that people learn how to prune, or do you recommend people get?
Well, I mean, the basics. The basics. I mean, the basics are very easy to actually understand, and without wanting to sort of cut my own throat work-wise, although I've got a lot of work, so it's not really crucial to me. The basics of pruning fruit trees, in fact, any tree really, the basics is essential. All the intricate pruning, when you read the books and you get bogged down in all those pictures and they tell you this and they tell you that, and you think, oh my God, you don't have to do all that sort of stuff. You just need to know the basics.
Right.
And the basics are always cut to something, a branch or a bud. Never take more than a third off the tree, unless you're a professional like me, and I do take more off. Always make sure the cropping centre is close to the trunk. What I mean by that is that you go to a lot of older trees and the fruit is right at the very end of the branch. You need to bring that in because that is where your limbs are at most at risk.
Yeah.
There's a cantilever effect. If you've got fruit dangling on the end right out, you're in danger of losing a limb. And it goes like a banana then. If you lose the big limb and then another big limb and another big limb, you've seen them in orchards, they just go like bananas.
Where's the best place for people to learn how to prune in your experience?
Well, I mean, you can get books on it, you can do YouTube on it. I think that one of the things I would say to people if you choose a book to read, try and stick to that same book. Don't try to do. I mean, so for instance, if you come to my practical workshops, which I do in Pembrokeshire and here in Gloucestershire, I try to get people to do the bare essentials to a tree, not to be too scared to take a big branch off, for instance, for the sake of the tree. It might not be what it says in the book, but the thing is, if you're going around a tree with a book, you could spend weeks going around that tree, because each time you're looking at a book going, oh, that's going to be a 45-degree angle, that's going to be this, that's going to be that. At the end of the day, the best place to go is a practical workshop where you actually see what people are doing.
Yeah.
I mean, you and me, for instance, we've tried to do some, and we will in the future, try and do some videos of how to prune, which is the next best thing, I think, to actually being there physically to watch somebody do it, is to actually have a film of somebody pruning with the person filming, asking questions, so that you can relate what needs to be done.
I think I might have lost you. Oops.
And it's very concentrated. My internet connection has just become unstable.
Yes, I saw that. So how? I know that you've been doing some remote pruning during the lockdown.
Yeah, I've done online pruning.
How's that been?
It's a bit funny because we did it ourselves, didn't we? Over in Poppet Sands. It's a bit funny because you can't see the whole tree as good as you can when you went. But one of the things is, what I say to people is, I'd rather do it that way and get the essentials done now, so that later on in the season I can come along when lockdown's finished. And I can come along and we can do the job properly and tidy up the tree. But when people show me online a picture of their tree, when they've got the camera pointed to their tree, I can really tell if the leader is too high and needs to be brought down, if the branches are too far out, they need to be brought in. And you can get people to do those cuts, and they will suffice for now until we can get lockdown over and all that.
Is the remote pruning, is this something that you offer across the country, or is this something that you really just want to keep locally?
I'm more than willing for people to get in touch to do it on Zoom if they want to do it like that. I'm happy. Lockdown is lockdown. It's my passion, isn't it? Yours is forest garden and what you do. I have to make a living, but I can make a living out there when lockdown. I mean, that's the good thing about my job as an orchardist, is that my job's on hold, but it's not ended.
Yeah.
I just take it up when the lockdown finishes and it eased. I can just take it up again. So, no, if people want to contact me, you can give them my email address. I can talk to them on email.
What's the best
way?
What's the best way?
Pardon?
Sorry, what's the best way to get hold of you? What's the easiest way to get hold of you?
If you just send me an email to start with. If you send me an email with probably photographs of your orchard, it would be better, of your trees, with something by the tree to give it some kind of perspective, like your partner or somebody just stood by the tree, so I can sort of work out the height of the tree. Best way is my email address, which you've got, Martin Hayes, martin.hayes9@bt. No, sorry, I changed. martin.hayes9@yahoo.com.
Haven't you got another website, the applemancan.uk?
The Appleman Can, which you know as well, Jake. I never use because I'm not very techno savvy. I guess I should really. I'll have to look into it, won't I?
I'll put this up on the recording. I'll make a note of it. I'll put it up in big letters. The Appleman Can.
So they can send me an email with pictures of the tree.
Yeah.
Saying that they came through you, that if they just tell me that they came through Jake Ryson's Forest Garden thing, then I know where they're from, because I get quite a lot, so I need to know how they contact. Only for my own curiosity more than anything. It's just that I know where they came from, and then we can go from there. If I can do something just online by telling them you cut that big branch down from the picture they sent, or we can do a remote Zoom session. I don't mind. I mean, I'm not doing much at the minute. I mean, it's 3 days really.
And in terms of the work, then the work on fruit trees, is it too late to prune apple trees because they're all in blossom?
No, but if it's large apple trees, if it's bigger fruit trees, any time of year, because it's very crucial if they've been neglected for a length of time, they need to be sorted. Prunus trees, plum, cherry, and of course all those things like damson and greengage, peach, apricot, all those sort of stuff with a stone in. You only prune after blossom when the fruit's set on the tree, up until harvest.
Why is that?
Not beyond.
Why is that?
Because of the diseases. So when the fruit is on the tree has its own kind of healing process, its own antiseptic. So it's the best time of year. Is the sap's all rising, it's healing. But if you prune at the wrong time of year, it sucks the disease in. And the two major diseases for plums is plum pox and silverleaf. Right. And people will try and sell you a cure for silverleaf. Don't buy it; it doesn't work. Okay. All you can do is manage it. So I go to a lot of orchards where they've pruned in winter plum trees, and the whole orchard is dying. Yeah. And it's just a case of managing it, really. And it's airborne and waterborne, so there's no way around it, really.
And so for people then who want to start growing fruit trees and starting out, when should they do this? What's the best time of year, and what's your advice to them when they're starting?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people go to your nurseries like B&Q and people like that, and they buy a potted plant. Not the best way to buy them. They work, but the best way is to get bare earth trees, and they start in December, the first week in December. It's much dependent on the weather. If the nursery can get in, if it's not too muddy, for instance, or too dry even, or it's been a very mild spell and the leaves and everything, the trees aren't dormant. So you take from December, beginning of December, up until generally the middle of April. It's a bit earlier this year because of lockdown. We did finish in March. We stopped all orders and we postponed orders till next season, really. So bare earthed, that's the best time when they're dormant. Yeah. It gives them the best start in life.
Are they cheap?
And if anybody wants to, again, my email address, I buy and I sell trees. Right. I get good deals because of the amount that I buy. I can get hold of purely organic trees or organically grown trees. The list will come out in September. So if anybody's interested in anything like that, the services I provide is everything to do with fruit trees. I can decide what trees you need.
So the bare root then, because they're cheaper.
They're cheaper as well.
And healthier.
And a lot healthier. Yeah.
Right. And what about?
Also, you tend to find that. And I'm looking at some now that I bought from Pound Stretcher, and they need nurturing. They need to have a professional doing the job on them, because some of them have been pruned as you get different styles of tree, bush varieties where they cut the leader out completely, and it's going to be a bush style tree. Which, unless you know how to look after these trees, you can have problems down the line with them. But, they were £5. I'm up for a challenge.
So what about rootstocks? Because I think a lot of people have heard of rootstocks but don't actually know why, what they are and why they're important.
Well, rootstocks are amazing things, really. And again, it's to do with human intervention and the ingenuity. And that's one of the reasons why I always look at commercial growers, because they're the innovators. That's where all the new stuff comes from. So the rootstock, basically, it will tell you how big your tree's going to be, in effect. So you can grow, like I am growing now, trees in plant pots. So if you live in the middle of London and you've got a veranda with a bit of sunlight, 6 hours of sunlight during the day, say, you can have a really healthy tree, or half a dozen really healthy trees, all grown in plant pots. When you go to the countryside and you see all those rows of trees planted on commercial farms with wire, they're on what their rootstock's called an M9, and it's a very small rootstock. It's on a wire because it can't support itself. Yeah. The smallest one you can get is an M27, and that is a garden plant pot variety. More of a it's not a commercial rootstock really, and they're a bit funny and a bit confusing because there's M27 is the smallest, M9 is second, M26 is the next one up, then M25. So it's going down but going up, and it's what confuses people. So M25 is a big full-on orchard tree.
So you really need
I've been to places where landscape architects have planted M25s in a flower bed outside their patio door.
Blimey. So you really need
they haven't understood the basics of rootstocks.
You need to get the right rootstock for the size of the garden.
And the only way really to do that is to have somebody that knows what they're doing, at least guide you through it. There's so many mistakes been made with rootstocks, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And you can get, like, with, for instance, the M25 rootstock, you get 40 to an acre, 40 trees to an acre of apples then. If you go down to an MM106, which is the best, in my opinion, fruit tree for productivity and just it's an all-round good tree to look after. It's easy to handle, but you do need a bit of space for it. It's not something you can put in a small garden.
Yeah.
But the MM106, for instance, you can get over 200, 230, 40 trees in an acre.
Yeah. So
M9s, you're talking thousands, because they're only a step apart, a metre apart.
Yeah. I do find this, like, when talking to people about forest gardens, and I say one of the things that you can do is to scale it down depending upon how much space you have for a forest garden. You choose the right size rootstock for your apple or your plum tree or your cherry tree according to the size that you have. So you can have a small forest garden, but the fruit trees are scaled down on a smaller rootstock.
Yes.
So the kind of
and generally the smaller rootstocks you espalier. Espalier them. So MM106 you can, but it's a semi-vigorous, so it's quite robust. So you really want to come down to an M26 or M27 if you want to espalier trees on an apple. And there's the equivalent on plum and pear. There's the equivalent sizes of trees. The rootstocks and the ones you can get and what you can do with them, you can talk forever about. Half standards, full standards. People get confused when you go to, and that's another thing with these ones from shop bought ones, being Kew and places like that. There's not enough information on the actual ticket that you get. There's a lot of burb on it, but actually it doesn't tell you the things you need to know about the tree.
Yeah.
It doesn't say on the trees that I've got here, it doesn't say that the plum, for instance, is a Julian A. Don't plant it too near the wall, it should knock your wall over. Do you know what I mean? You can espalier them, but you have to have them away from the wall a bit. You can't, because the roots are pretty
robust.
And so you really need to do your research on rootstocks.
Yeah. And you can provide that information, or is there anywhere that you'd recommend online to have a look for information about rootstocks?
I think that probably there's loads of information you can get on rootstocks. You just have to Google fruit tree rootstocks.
Right. I've got a web page on my I've got a page on my website as well with basic information about different rootstocks.
Yeah, it is basic. I think that it's very difficult to get your head round sometimes. As I say, I've been to places where they've wanted to get as many trees in as they can, and they planted M27s, and they have to be staked all their life. You can't get away with just leaving it grow.
Yeah.
So the M26, you can get away with that if you keep it small enough. The M26 can stay upright on its own without a stake. The MM106 can, and the M25, but M27, M9, there's a few other ones, more technical ones to do with. This is where it gets a bit technical. It's to do with dry and wet conditions.
Right.
There's rootstocks for all that, and you need to know the ones to get.
Yeah.
Not many of a lot of the main rootstock sites that tell you about rootstocks, they only tell you about the main ones they know. But there's a wealth of other ones.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? They just tell you the basics of what you need to know. Whether small garden, you need a small tree, plant pot. It doesn't really go into any depth.
So what are your favourite varieties? I'm actually interested in the answer to this question because I don't know.
Apple
is
an Ashmead kernel.
Oh, it is.
You've got one of them.
Yeah, I just planted one. Yeah.
It is beautiful, beautiful colours. Colours are fantastic on it. It's like a russet. It's like an Egremont russet, and I like Egremont russet as well. But it's got that yellowy, orangey, and then that brown russet over it. And it is a beautiful apple, and it's a good juicer. It's a good eater. One thing with it is it's not as reliable as most apples. So some years it might not put on as much as others. Other ones, lesser ones, more commercial ones, I suppose, really, because the Ashmead's Kernel is an apple from Stroud in Gloucestershire, just down the road from me here. Discovery apple. Most people come up to me at the show, the one in what's the one in St Dogs there. They come up with an apple and they say, I found this apple in my garden, it's red in the middle, it's really rare, and it's a discovery. And they always come up with this big excitement about what apple they've got, and it's always a discovery. It's a lovely first season apple. Blenheim Orange I like because of its, you can eat it later on. It's got different stages of when it's good. Looks wise, and taste, I like a Spartan. I think a Spartan in an orchard just looks absolutely stunning. That dark maroon, beautiful apple in an orchard.
Oh, fantastic.
Bit tough skin from Canada, but a good apple, nice apple. So there's quite a few that's around. Hereford Russet, with plums. Well, plums, Warwickshire Drooper, they've got great names. We've got one here called a shit smock. I mean,
shit smock?
A great name, a shit smock, yeah. So they reckon that the story is that if you eat 7 of them, you shit yourself. So great in crumbles if you want to get rid of your guests. Yeah, so they've got loads of, but I like a Warwickshire Drooper, which is a lovely peach-like plum. A lot of people cook with it, but actually, if you leave it on the tree long enough, it's a beautiful eater. Victoria is an all-round. Excalibur is a good one. That's a cross between a Welsh plum and a Victoria, because they want the season of Victorias to expand longer because the Victoria's so popular.
Yeah. So
they came out with all these Victoria-type plums, and Excalibur was one of them. And then there's some amazingly resilient plums like Blaisdon Red, which is a local variety here, that they reckon that the Napoleonic Wars, they took dried ones in their backpacks and they just ate them as they walked along. Because, as in putting a fruit, if you're feeling thirsty, they say put a fruit stone in your mouth and just, I don't know, it's going to help. Yeah. And they would walk along chewing these dried plums, Blaisdon Reds. Pears, well, I like ones that explode in your mouth. Those big, like a Williams Bon Cretin, isn't it? That just, when you bite into them and you get covered in it. I don't like those. When I used to sell them, fruit, people used to love pears that were a bit like parsnips. They're just so hard, you can hardly bite into them, and they just had that touch of sweetness. And I don't know, I used to sell them really underripe because people just love them. I couldn't stand them at all. They had to be really, really pear-like.
Fantastic.
And cherries, anything really. Cherry's a cherry, isn't it? Gorgeous.
Yay. Fantastic stuff. Right then, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for chatting. We have got a copy of your book. Oh, have you got it there?
You've got a copy.
I've got a copy, yes. I'm not giving my copy away.
No, I've got a copy for you to give away. Lovely illustrations in there. Basically, it's my time as an itinerant worker, and I think you're going to set the rules, are you?
Yes. Well, it's very simple. It's just please submit an image that you've created of Blossom, and email it to me. It's Jake. hello@forestgarden.wales. The email is hello@forestgarden.wales. And it can be in any media. So I know people are in lockdown at the moment, so it can be a photograph that they've taken previously, a drawing. They can even make it out of macaroni. Macaroni glued onto a bed.
Can people phone in and describe it?
That would be fun. A poem about blossom would be perfectly acceptable as well. So we'll see how we go. We'll see how we go with this one. So so do send them in. An image you've created of blossom, I think would be lovely, and then send it to me.
I have to just say, I have to interject there that I'm not going.
You're not going to judge it. No. I will ask my 4-year-old and my 9-year-old to be the judges of the images. Yeah. So they all make the decision. Do send in your your images of blossom to me. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you for your time, and
no worries.
I shall catch up with you soon. And
anybody needs to get in touch. So, you've got my details, haven't you?
Yeah, I'll put your details out, and this will go up, and I'll put this video on YouTube as well with all the details too, so people have there'll be
what's the YouTube channel that you're on?
Forest Garden Wales, all one word.
Okay.
Yeah. So I can't remember what the URL is for it, but it's Forest Garden Wales on YouTube.
Okay.
I've just started
I'll have
using
a look. See how I come across.
I like the background. The breeze block does it for me.
Yes, I did think of putting an apple picture up and all sorts of stuff, but it's freezing. It's chucking it down with rain now. I'm really pleased coming up. I've got my hands in my pockets.
Okay.
Thermals on.
Right then. Thank you very much,
Okay,
and goodbye to everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers.
Speak to you
Bye.
soon then, Jake. Yeah.
Bye.